Hi, everyone. It's 3 minutes past the hour, so I suggest that we start. Um, Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are around the world, and welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining today's webinar on the plight of the 696 political prisoners in the Philippines, including 93 who are elderly and 89 who are seriously ill. My name is Claire Chastain, and I am a member of the Global Council of ICHRP, the International Coalition for Human Rights in the Philippines. I am based in Barcelona with the Catalan Association for Peace, Asociació Catalana per la Pau. And I must say that it's quite important for us to express from Catalonia our solidarity and support to the political prisoners in the Philippines and their families and their communities. Because, and I don't want, of course, to compare the direness of the situation in the Philippines with ours in Catalonia, but Catalonia has had political prisoners in the past decade, and it is quite a peculiar situation in Western Europe. Those people were jailed for making use of their right of opinion and expression by participating in a referendum of self-determination back in 2017. So it really means a lot to me to be emceeing today's webinar. Today, we will have two keynote speakers from the Philippines to elaborate on the situation of the political prisoners, as well as Pastor Alan from Peace for Life. We will also have a member of the Global Council of ICHRP, another member, not me, as well as a member of the Global Coordinating Committee of Friends of the Filipino People in Struggle. Maybe I will give you before a background. I will maybe just give some logistical reminders. If you could please remain on mute throughout the duration of the webinar. And I think we have interpretation available in Cantonese. So for those who need interpretation, you need to click on the interpretation icon on your Zoom app and the one that looks like a globe. Okay, so if you need help, maybe we can help with the technical aspects. And I want to say that at the end of this webinar, we will have an open forum for about 15 minutes. It depends on how long we last in the first part. So if you have questions, you can place them in the chat, and I will give them to the speakers at the end of the webinar. Today we will have those keynote speakers and other speakers, but I want to just give you a little background on the Marcos regimes. Today it is in deep crisis, and it has worldwide attention because of the massive systematic plunder of the people's money through corruption of contracts for flood control and other infrastructure projects. The Filipino people are mobilizing in very large numbers in the streets to call for the resignation of President Marcos Jr. and Vice President Sara Duterte and all other officials responsible for this systematic plunder. As well, we have former President Duterte in detention now in Europe, in The Hague, at the International Criminal Court facilities. He's awaiting trial on the charge of crimes against humanity of murder, torture, and rape. This regime is really on the verge of collapse and has very little credibility in the international community today. That's pretty much the backdrop to the scandalous widespread repression of democratic activists, defenders over decades, with the, as I said in the beginning, 696 peace and human rights defenders who are languishing in prison on trumped up and fabricated charges. Many have not even had trial, but have been awaiting a hearing for many years. I will just now stop, and before this, let me just introduce Pastor Alan Sarte from Peace for Life. He's going to be the first speaker. Well, I just give you the floor now, Pastor Alan. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Claire. Good evening and good morning, depending on which part of the planet you are in now. Welcome to this webinar on free all political prisoners in the Philippines. Today, December 3, marks the Global Day of Solidarity with Political Prisoners. And so, Peace for Life, which is a faith based platform for peace and justice, engaged in building solidarity and mobilizing the power of spirituality against life threatening forces of imperialism. And the International Coalition for Human Rights in the Philippines, or ICHERP, which is a global network of organizations focused on addressing the human rights situation in the Philippines and committed to campaigning for just and lasting peace in the country, have organized this webinar forum so we get to have a shared understanding of the situation, issues, and challenges faced by political prisoners in the Philippines. The issue of political uh, the issue of political wait the issue of political prisoners in the Philippines highlights the deep-rooted repression that undermines our quest for genuine peace. True peace can only be achieved when we confront and dismantle the unjust social, political, and economic systems that are root causes of armed conflict. The Marcos Jr. administration claims to seek peace, but in reality, it targets and silences those who challenges the status quo. Peace consultants and human rights defenders, as Claire has already mentioned, are incarcerated on baseless charges, serving as stark symbols of the ongoing struggle for a just society. The fight for peace is inextricably linked to the liberation of all political prisoners. So we are happy for our friends and allies who have joined us in this webinar. We value very much our international solidarity networks and allies who are one with us in this campaign. The pressure you give from within and outside the Philippines, apart from the moral, political, and material support you give, can contribute much to this campaign. Solidarity for us is not just symbolic, it is our weapon for freeing all political prisoners and for a just and lasting peace in the Philippines and elsewhere. Thank you all for joining and welcome again to this Freedom All webinar on political prisoners in the Philippines. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pastor Alan. Next, we have Cristina Palabay. She's the Secretary General of Karapatan, National Human Rights Alliance of the Philippines. And she will tell us about these political prisoners, who they are, why they are in prison, and what are their conditions, and what they are doing as part of the national democratic struggle of the Filipino people. Tinay, I think you all know her, but she began her political activism as a student at the University of the Philippines, as the Secretary General of the Nationwide Alliance of University of the Philippines Students' Councils, and later on as the National President of the National Union of Students of the Philippines. She is among the founders and was later the Secretary General of Gabriela Women's Party. And Cristina is also a board member of Kapederasayon, an organization of lesbian, gays, bisexuals, and transgenders in the Philippines. And I think to us, she's Tinay. And it's an honor, as usual, to have you in this kind of webinars. So you have the floor, Tinay. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Sorry, I was coughing. Good evening, and I wish I could say Happy International Day of Solidarity on Political Prisoners, but I'd rather say a militant greetings to everyone, especially those who are campaigning, who marched on the streets today, and held actions and activities for political prisoners at the global level, and those who supported the Filipino political prisoners today. Let me go first to the definitions, because definitions of on political prisoners uh, are quite I mean it's are quite controversial, especially at the international level. Many people have various definitions, but for Karapatan, we define political prisoners as citizens who are arrested, detained, and imprisoned for acting on their socio-political beliefs or faith. They are arbitrarily denied their liberty and constitutional right to due process, and many of them endured torture. This is almost the same and similar with the definition of the um, Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, or PACE, as defined in their current documents. PACE defines political prisoners as those whose detention is imposed in violation of fundamental guarantees under the European Convention on Human Rights, which includes the freedom of thought, expression, or assembly. Detention is for political reasons without being necessarily connected to any criminal offense. A person can be considered a political prisoner when you have a disproportionate sentence. The detention applied in a discriminatory manner for political motives, and you are subjected to unfair proceedings. This is the closest definition that we adhere to as a Human Rights Alliance here in the Philippines, um, in describing the plight, the character of political prisoners here. Some groups would call uh, activists peacefully, and that is a qualitative term, no? um, quote unquote, peacefully exercising their political beliefs, or exercising their rights. No? There is a controversy there because, who defines who is peacefully engaging in activism, or um, those exercising their rights, and it's usually the states when we talk of using these terms. The states get to define who are terrorists, who are peacefully doing this kind of work, who are violent. And for them, any threat to the status quo or to the state can be considered violence. Or those individuals engaging in such can be considered as enemies of the state. Of course, there are those who are considered prisoners of war. These are combatants, who have been in the custody of their counterpart combatants from the other side. And this is widely accepted under the Geneva Conventions. But under the UN, um, they only have, they don't necessarily have an official nomenclature for political prisoners. In fact, we were quite surprised when the High Commissioner for Human Rights, Volker Turk, who's from Austria, marked uh I think it was 2023, if I'm not mistaken, a year of political prisoners. What he did was quite um groundbreaking, so to speak, because we heard that many states were asking for his head when he insisted on doing that kind of campaign. The UN would only refer to people incarcerated as prisoners. That's it. So these are defined under the Mandela rules, the minimum uh, rules for the treatment of prisoners, as well as the Bangkok rules, the set of guidelines on women prisoners. In the Philippines, they would refer to prisoners, all kinds of prisoners, as persons deprived of liberty. Mhm. That's a very, should we say, smoke screeny way to hide the political nature of um, the reasons behind the incarceration of certain people, including political prisoners. So when we say political prisoners, many would, you know, uh, ask us that, oh, does this include politicians who are prisoners? We say that if they are, they are arrested and detained because of their political beliefs and exercise of the various freedoms, then they should be there. But if they're there for any other reason, for example, they want to do some power grab or military junta or whatever, um, it would be impossible for us to consider them political prisoners. Next slide. So, um, in the Philippines, most of the political prisoners come from farmers. And as the majority of our population is. And of course, there are those from the workers, fisher folks, indigenous and Moro peoples, women, youth, activists, and but they also include people who are really not affiliated. We had several cases before who were arrested on what is so-called mistaken identity. No? And we say that it's mistaken identity because, state forces know precisely who they are arresting, no? But they are arresting them for the wrong reasons. They're arresting them mainly for bounty, or they get a reward if they get arrests, or quota if they meet quotas of arresting people, even if the identities are not correct. So we have at least documented at least 20 people who had been arrested due to mistaken identity. So political prisoners, they can be considered, we consider them political prisoners. Next slide. So fortunately, we've had several releases the past months. That's why the current number of political prisoners as of November 30 is at 696. So we'd have to revise this. Um, and arrested under Marcos remains at 169. But and the rest are there, in the slides. Of course, a large number are elderly, and there are those who are very sick, and then a big number are women. So when we look at these numbers, um, and when we look at the places where they have been arrested or they are currently detained, 43%, of this number, 696, are in Mindanao. 43%. That is 302 out of 696. 35% are detained in Luzon. And 14% are currently detained in a small island known as Negros. These are important aggregates to take note of, because these are the areas, particularly Mindanao and Negros, these are the areas wherein the National Task Force to End Local Communist Armed Conflict have unleashed intense military operations, including bombings and ground operations to impose essentially a de facto martial law in various communities in the Philippines. And they have targeted leaders of peasant organizations, of lumad organizations, leaders and members of organizations of farm workers and hacienda workers in Negros. So, next slide. Um, so, nevertheless, all of them are victims of government repression. No? And as we say, no country should consider itself a democracy when when there are political prisoners within these countries. Next slide. What happens with political prisoners is that in the Philippines, they're not charged with any political offense. It is very rare, in fact, perhaps less than 1% of the 696 political prisoners have rebellion charges against them. Most of them are facing criminal offenses. No? And the most used charges, trumped up charges against them are murder, illegal possession of firearms and explosives, um, cases of kidnapping and arson. But majority are charged with illegal possession of firearms and explosives and murder. And the reasons are, number one, when you are charged with illegal possession of firearms and explosives, it's very easy to plant evidence against you. What we have here in the Philippines is a very, what we call sloppy, so to speak, criminal investigation practices, procedures, and systems. So it is heavily reliant on testimonial evidence. So, and there's what is known as presumption of regularity during police or military operations, which means that the accused should prove that there is irregularity in these police operations when you get arrested or detained or under custody of law enforcement. So, when evidence is planted against you, they usually do it, just very sloppily also. That is the reason why many cases or most cases of such have been dismissed. They would plant, for example, in certain cases, those who had been arrested during the Bloody Sunday killings, evidence, guns and grenades were planted under their pillows or under their beds. And that's enough for law enforcement to charge them with illegal possession of firearms and explosives using only search warrants, not necessarily warrants of arrests. When they get charged with murder, most of the time or um, all the time they don't even get notices or subpoenas in relation to when complaints are filed, at the prosecutor level. What they would realize later on was that they have already been charged with these cases when once warrants of arrest had been delivered to their offices or their homes, etc. So there are several key violations when you look at those circumstances. But primarily, criminalization, when we say criminalization of political offenses, means that the political nature of the arrest and detention of these people are hidden. That's why criminal charges are filed against them. Next slide. In terms of their arrests, of course, as I've mentioned, there are several violations, both of the Philippine Constitution and international instruments. So that includes, how do they do that? That includes planting of evidence, that includes, setting up paid witnesses to testify or issue judicial affidavits to say that, okay, I saw these people in some encounter with the military and the NPA. So literally they would, list names of people whom the military would say that, we recognized 100 people with these names in the in the encounter of the armed forces of the Philippines with the NPA, and these are their names, their legal names. They don't even, hide their, stupidity, if I can say that, because they would just pick the names from the internet, or they have what we call a rogues gallery. They collect intel or information on people, including legal activists, and they put these names in the various cases that they would conjure. Yeah. All of these are, of course, by design, trumped up. Yeah. In all of the previous counterinsurgency programs up to the current counterinsurgency programs, what is an element, a key element of in their minds, no, in the military and the government's mind, is that um, we need to conduct legal offensives. That's what they're using. No, those are the terms that they were using. Legal offensives to use the legal system, the justice system, to go after these criminals, these terrorists, and these enemies of the state. Of course, they have a new staple they have a new staple of laws that they use right now to arrest and imprison people. And these are the anti-terrorism law and the terrorism financing prevention and suppression law. So we documented at least 200 people who have been arrested. 30 of them remain in jail up to the as of this November, and they are facing these charges under the what we call terrorism or terror laws. And many charges have been dismissed, but they keep on filing new charges every time. That's why many of our colleagues are quite in a quandary, so to speak, because these are fairly new laws. We're trying out new ways to navigate the justice system when it comes to confronting or challenging these laws. But definitely, we will continue to challenge the constitutionality of these terror laws. Next slide. Okay, next slide. So, we have the worst situation of jails probably next to Myanmar, no, in this side of the world, in Southeast Asia, because I think we are at 300 to 400% over congestion rate of in terms of the prisons that we have here in the Philippines. Um, Food is really hideous, no? Because the food budget here is like per prisoner is at less than $2 a day. Budget for this is medicine for a day is at 15 pesos. So that's how much is that? Less than maybe 20 or 30 cents. So it's very minimal. Of course, a part of that budget goes to corruption inside jail. There are various forms of corruption inside jail. That's why corruption is really something that political prisoners are very familiar with. Water supply, there's no potable water or less sources of potable water inside. There are no reproductive health facilities, much less, appropriate health care. There's only one doctor. Would you believe that? There's only one medical doctor for prisoners in Metro Manila. And prisoners in Metro Manila are at 20,000 in various jails in Metro Manila. So you only have one doctor who will go around these jails. And most of the time, the jail, those in prison are the ones, including political prisoners, are the ones tending to those who are sick inside jail. Of course, there are several abusive and corrupt jail guards. There are unfair and arbitrary policies that includes strip searches, which is a practice that is most condemned, especially by the Working Group on Arbitrary Detention of the UN. Next slide. So basically, um, the persecution of political prisoners continues inside. They are subjected to inhumane conditions as a part of the prison population, and at the same time, or most of the time, they are subjected to more strict or restrictive policies precisely because they're political prisoners. Um, and of course, political prisoners continue to their work, inside jails, as many in other countries do. So when they organize activities, they face reprisals because of their actions. This is the reason why in the Negros Occidental District Jail, political prisoners led by former priest Frank Fernandez, who's also a peace consultant of the NDF, right now are subjected to such harsh and restrictive conditions by a jail warden who wants to, go, to flaunt his power. And that's the reason why they are doing protest fast or hunger strike starting today until maybe on the 10th. So what can we do? Of course, public information, next slide please, is important. Pressure is important. Mobilization of allies. The show of support, for example, for Frenchie May, Cumpio, by several. Of course, they would say that, diplomatic missions feel like Frenchie's safe because she's a journalist. No? But we are pressuring them to visit other political prisoners as well. They would need help for their health and welfare needs. Their families definitely would need help because most of them, as I mentioned, are from the rural areas. So visiting a loved one, will need resources. They would need resources to do that. Some of them don't get to visit their loved ones for like 2 to 3 to 4 years. And lastly, I think the most like how political prisoners would view it. The most important aspect in terms of supporting political prisoners is supporting their struggle, as part of the struggle of the Filipino people. So in various ways, in supporting various sectors, the campaign for the release of political prisoners are integrated. And the struggle as well, their struggles inside jail are definitely part of the struggle of the mass movement and the whole people's movement outside prison. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tina. I think that we have like 3 or 4 petition for you to send the presentation, because as always, it's very exhaustive and very precise and very, very useful to all of us. And I didn't say in the beginning, but I take the opportunity now to say that if you have, as Tina has said, the possibility to support, to give political support, international solidarity, to write letters, to donate, including visiting political prisoners in jail. We did it last year when the ACP and IAP had a delegation. We had the possibility to visit someone in Iligan State Prison. But I really encourage all of you to get in touch with us, Aicher Karapatan, because we can provide material in coordination with TINAI. You can visit if you want also more information, more resources to give this support, this political support to campaign. So I will give you the website in the end, but don't hesitate. You will find to reach to us and ask any support or information we can give you. to help. Thanks again, Tinay, and I will now give the floor to our next speaker, Raymond Monk Palatino. He's a Filipino blogger, activist, environmentalist, and he's a former legislator. He's the Philippines' first elected youth representative from 2009 to 2013. As a blogger, his writings have been published in several alternative websites in the Philippines, such as Bulatlat, Manila Today, and including countless pieces on political prisoners, peace and human rights. He has been also the Southeast Asia editor of Global Voices, a citizen media platform, since 2008. And currently, Mong is the Secretary General of Bagong Alisang Bakabayan, or Bayan, which is a multi-sectoral alliance of people's organizations, as you may know. As a national level leader of the democratic movement, Mong can place the struggle of the Filipino political prisoners into a wider framework of the historic effort to transform Filipino society into a democratic nation, able to provide a peaceful, a sustainable, and prosperous life for all its people. So please welcome Mong Palatino, and Mong, you have the floor.
Thank you, and good greetings, good morning or good evening to everyone. Thank you to Tinay for providing context and sharing the overall situation of political prisoners. Tinay is actually my contemporary in the university and student movement. Okay. So, with regard to the issue of political prisoners and the struggle for just and lasting peace, many of the political prisoners include consultants of the National Democratic Front who are involved in previous peace negotiations. But they also include activists, human rights defenders charged with Trump up cases. And this has something to do with the government's counterinsurgency program framed under a so-called whole of nation approach, but it is essentially militarization in the countryside and crackdown on dissent and those who are fighting for change in Philippine society. So let me share my presentation for faster discussion. Wait. Okay, so what is the situation of peace under the Marcos Jr. Administration? As we all know, Marcos assumed power 3 years ago. Um, in 2023, November, the government announced the signing of a framework for or a document for possible peace agreement, a peace negotiation with the Communist Party of the Philippines and the National Democratic Front. 2 years have passed. There's no update on this. Marcos has yet to form a panel that will be in charge of resuming the peace negotiation. And see, this is not surprising because what Marcos is doing is a continuation of the Duterte era policy. During the Duterte administration, he formed the notorious National Task Force to end local communist armed conflict. And Marcos not only continued to maintain this notorious task force, but it expanded its mandate. It allowed it to extend its operations. And then Marcos signed a memorandum, uh, NAPUPD, National Action Plan for Unity, Peace, and Development. And the lead agency for this National Action Plan, UPD, is no other than the NTF-ELCAC. So the blueprint of the government in pursuing peace is essentially to continue the work of NTF-ERCAP, which is closing the door to peace negotiations, which would mean uh, the worsening human rights situation, militarization of in the countryside, and the tried and tested failed blueprint of ending the civil war in the Philippines through intense militarization instead of addressing the roots of the armed conflict. So our chairperson, Nato Reyes, has this to say about the NAPUPD. Makes no mention of addressing the root causes of the armed conflict. Makes no commitment to resume the peace negotiations. So that's why the document signed by the government November 2023 is essentially shelved in favor of this blueprint framework, uh, elevating the role of NTF-ELCAC in leading other agencies in pursuing peace, but not through addressing the roots of armed conflict, but through the tried and tested failed formula of attacking dissenters and justifying attacks in rural communities. We suspiciously NAP-UPD was announced in the wake of the Marcos government's pivoting closer to the US. He conducted several trips to the US, signed several security agreements, which led to the expansion of US military bases, military intervention in the Philippines, but also allowing the US to have greater say in our security program and security policies, which led to the establishment, for example, of the so-called Combined Coordination Center inside Camp Aguinaldo, the main headquarters of the Armed Forces of the Philippines. One of the agreements signed by Marcos and the U.S. government is allowing the U.S. to have an influence on how we will spend our defense budget, how we will share intelligence information, uh, and the implication of this is that we will view internal and external threats through the lens of the US. So our question and our analysis as well is Marcos pivoting closer to the US not only allowed the US to have greater military intervention under the guise of defending the Philippines from the so-called looming Chinese invasion, but also enabling the US to have a greater role, direct or indirect, in local counterinsurgency operations. Karapatan has several statements about NAP UPD. So Karapatan mentioned our uh, continuing critic to the government's counterinsurgency program because it makes no distinction between the civilians and combatants. For the government, as long as uh, your group is named as one of the so-called front organizations of the Communist Party of the Philippines, you're fair game. You are already judged as an enemy of the state. So whether you are a human rights advocate, a civil society member, an activist, an academic, you are targeted. At the minimum, you are red tag, but it could also lead to vicious human rights attacks and abuses. So we fear, and I think, and it is already happening. The NAPUPD is a blueprint legitimizing crackdown on non-government organizations, people's organizations, and the crackdown has various manifestations in the form of filing trump up cases, uh, in the form of freezing the bank accounts of people's organizations, uh, also in making it difficult for activists to conduct our activities in our communities and also in engaging government agencies. CLPI issued a statement a few days ago on the anniversary of the signing of the peace document, which I mentioned earlier. And CLPI criticized NAP UPD because it closes the door to the resumption of the peace process. And what is important in the statement of CLPI, it mentioned how NAP-UPD exacerbates corruption. If maybe if you are monitoring Philippine news today, the raging issue now in the Philippines is corruption, particularly infrastructure corruption. So elected politicians have been accused of getting kickbacks and endorsing ghost projects related to flood control, amounting to billions of pesos. Some say it could reach 1 trillion pesos. And President Marcos has been accused of receiving almost $1 billion in cash from these flood control projects. So, what's the relation of these corruption issues with the struggle for just peace? For the security sector, their flood control scam is the counterinsurgency operation. Through the so-called localized peace efforts by presenting activists as fake surrenderies, presenting urban poor members of mass organizations as rebel returnees, uh, distributing funds in barangays or villages for supposedly local peace efforts, but they are money-making schemes for corrupt generals. So counterinsurgency is how corrupt generals in the army and the police make money. So they are justifying the request for billions of pesos every year from the national government. Uh, and they justify this by mentioning the need to finally end insurgency in the Philippines through these uh, spurious initiatives. But these are bound to fail because that not only they are not genuine or sincere, but they do not address the roots of the armed conflict. So this is also what is pointed out by NUPL in their critique against the NAP-UPD. So NUPL criticized the whole of nation approach being promoted actively by the government. And so it is bound to fail because aside from not addressing the roots of the armed conflict, it relies on trump-up charges, perjured testimony, state-recruited witnesses. And this is all related to the cases filed against our political prisoners. NUPL has this statement because that is their experience in handling the cases of our political prisoners. Most of them, all of them, uh, have been charged with fabricated evidence and testimonies from rebel returnees, even absurd testimonies. So the intent is not just uh, to arrest and deliver justice. Their real intent is to derail the mass movement, disrupt the campaigns of people's organizations. Because who are these political prisoners? There are the NDF consultants who are involved in the peace process. But also, most of the political prisoners are activists, human rights defenders, farmers, workers who are in the grassroots, organizing, but more importantly, criticizing the anti-people programs of the government and presenting alternatives that will democratize Philippine society, that challenge elite rule in the Philippines. So, what is to be done? So this is one of our rallies this year. Change the rotten or bankrupt system. So we have been organizing a series of massive protests. So more than 100,000 people protested in Metro Manila alone in September 21. And then a few days ago, November 30, more than 90,000 people protested across the Philippines, expressing outrage against corruption. But this protest is not just uh, a reflection of the people's clamor for accountability. It is the people's rejection of a system that breeds inequality, poverty, injustice. And we have arrived at a conclusion that the only way to stop the cycle from repeating is to end this bankrupt system dominated by political dynasties, which makes sure that they will remain in power by stealing money from the national treasury, monopolizing access to the political machinery, making sure that the government contracts and programs will benefit their cronies, the oligarchs, their businesses, making sure that their foreign patrons will also benefit from this kind of government by imposing policies that will give super profits to big corporations and to imperialist powers like the US to the detriment of local producers. And the 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 solution to the rising number of political prisoners is to challenge this government, whose idea of peace is for the people uh, to stop asserting our rights. So this afternoon, the statement of the Malacanang Presidential Palace is that we are nearing the end game in our fight against corruption because the government is finally pursuing reforms. Their concept of endgame is different from our concept of ending the rule of the dynasties, ending the rule of fascists, and ending the rule of Marcos, who is not only corrupt and beholden to foreign powers, but is guilty of grave crimes against the Filipino people. So, in the next few days, we are preparing for the another massive protest on December 10, to remind our people and to mobilize people that the fight for human rights uh, will entail a change in our society so that corruption or bureaucrat capitalism will end, uh, foreign domination, and the use of the abuse of power to commit human rights abuses, to make sure that the elite will remain in power. So, uh, there's a long struggle for the release of political prisoners. We are connecting the fight in our local communities and the struggle for just peace. There are victories and losses, but what is important is we keep on fighting, and we keep on moving forward in our vision for democratic and free Philippines. Thank you very much, and good afternoon.
Thank you very much to you, Mong. Actually, I think that I don't know if someone has already request for your presentation, but I would request for your presentation because I think that you have connected all the issues and helped us through the complexity of this situation, because it's so many issues that are intertwined. And we see that there is this false rhetoric of the government of the Philippines talking about peace and human rights and plans for peace and human rights, but behind it, it's counterinsurgency plans and systematic persecution to any decent voice, and all this is sustained by institutional corruption. So I think that as well, we need to respond by connecting the issues and connecting and amplifying the struggles. Thank you very much for your presentation. I think it was very, very helpful. Next speaker, we have Simon from the Global Coordinating Committee of the Friends of the Filipino People in Struggle, or FFPS, as we know them. FFPS is an international network building support for the Filipino people's aspirations and struggles for national and social liberation, and for the National Democratic Front of the Philippines, the NDFP, as a people's movement advancing the people's 12-point program for a just and lasting peace in the Philippines. FFP has worked through education, mobilization, and other forms of concrete solidarity, and to amplify the voices of the Filipino masses, share information about their struggles, and strengthen anti-imperialist solidarity with the Philippine Revolution. So Simon, this is your turn and you have the floor. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, Claire. And really, what an honor it is to be speaking after Tinai and Mong, who really set the stage for us and gave us the context of both current and historical basis for why it's so important for us as FFPS to take up international solidarity with the struggle of the Filipino people. Um, as we've heard, in the pursuit of just and lasting peace in the Philippines, the Filipino people have taken various paths of resistance, including the legal national democratic struggle with these massive protests, especially as we've seen in the past few months, but also, importantly, the revolutionary path of taking up arms and pursuing national and social liberation against U.S. imperialism, feudalism, and bureaucrat capitalism, which are the roots of a social and economic system that breeds injustice and poverty for the majority of the people. The realities of exploitation and oppression of a systematic unpeace under a semi-feudal and semi-colonial system provide the basis for why so many Filipinos do take up arms in revolution. As Friends of the Filipino People in Struggle, we particularly amplify the National Democratic Front of the Philippines, or NDFP, and its allied organizations in their position that a just and lasting peace, a people's peace in the Philippines, can only be brought about through the People's Democratic Revolution that fights for national and social liberation. This fight is detailed and laid out in the NDFP's 12-point program, which offers a vision of a Philippine society based on the needs of the majority of Filipinos. It is a vision of a nation that is independent from US or other foreign domination, an economy that serves the needs of the people instead of foreign capitalists and a small domestic ruling elite, and a society that is just, democratic, peaceful, and prosperous. The Philippine government, directed and funded by U.S. imperialism, violently represses all forms of dissent. Through a brutal counterinsurgency program, communities of peasants and indigenous peoples are kept in order or apparently insurgency free, with a de facto martial law where civilian rule is toppled over by military rule, which includes bombings, helicopter strafing, and strategic hamleting of entire communities. We have heard in this webinar that under past regimes, as well as the current U.S. Marcos regime, the Philippine government has also relied on imprisonment to silence dissent and suppress the people's resistance. Imprisonment is also used as a weapon against NDFP peace consultants and staff involved in the peace process who have become a target through their political work for a just and lasting peace. The term NDFP peace consultants came into being after 1995 with the signing of the Joint Agreement on Safety and Immunity Guarantees, or JASIG. This agreement states that the GRP and the NDF would issue documents of identification to people involved in the peace process. Individuals with documents of identification were supposed to have safety and immunity to ensure their open and free participation in the peace process. NDFP peace consultants and staff perform very important and critical roles in the road to a just and lasting peace. Many of them are leaders and members of mass organizations or unions who are deeply engaged in the struggle for the rights and interests of the people and for the people's desire for national and social liberation. It's through this integration that they really are in the best position to help inform and put forward the people's demand for a just and lasting peace. Peace consultants are spread all throughout the many islands of the Philippines, and their role in updating the negotiating panel on the situation of the people, on their needs and demands, is an essential contribution to the peace process. They truly are the pulse that keeps the negotiating panel informed of the situation on the ground. Many of these peace consultants form the various working committees, such as the Reciprocal Working Group on Social and Economic Reforms and Reciprocal Working Committee on the Comprehensive Agreement on Social and Economic Reforms, or CACER. And as members of these committees, they have ensured that the NDFP's vision, which is laid out in the 12-point program, advances the people's agenda and demand for genuine change. The last list of people with documents of identification had around 85 names on it. However, in practice, the government of the Republic of the Philippines has completely disregarded these signed agreements, such as JASIG, leading to the arrest of many NDFP consultants, as well as the brutal murder of many others, including Benito Chamson, Wilma Austria, Randy Achanas, and Randy Malayao. And those are names are people who have been killed just in the last 5 to 6 years. There are currently around 15 NDFP peace consultants and staff held detained as political prisoners. The imprisonment of NDFP peace consultants and staff involved in the peace process is not only a violation of the signed JASIG agreement and a violation of their fundamental rights against unjust detention, but also undermines what is left of the peace process between the GRP and the NDFP. It means that the negotiating panel has fewer people in the field supporting the panel and representing the demands of the Filipino people. The continuing incarceration of NDFP peace consultants such as Vicente Ladlad, Father Frank Fernandez, Adalberto Silva, and many others represents the insincerity of the GRP in pursuing just and lasting peace. In this light, it is urgent for us to support the call to free all NDFP peace consultants as well as all political prisoners in the Philippines. So I will close just by sharing a little bit about some of our current campaign work. As Friends of the Filipino People in Struggle, we are campaigning to raise international awareness about the struggle of political prisoners in the Philippines, particularly NDFP peace consultants who are incarcerated. We are working to generate international solidarity and support for their release and advocacy. Our members are producing and distributing materials about political prisoners to highlight their role in the pursuit of just and lasting peace, even from behind bars. We are working to mobilize moral, material, and political support for them, their families, and organizations working for justice and freedom of political prisoners. This campaign includes our current 2-week global solidarity drive, a fundraising campaign, €1 for freedom, where we are encouraging individuals and organizations to contribute €1 or whatever their local currency is per day for a minimum of 14 days to support the legal defense, humanitarian assistance, and campaign work for political prisoners. So I will close there. Thank you so much for having us as Friends of the Filipino People in Struggle. We look forward to much more work alongside you all to uplift the demands of the Filipino people and to free all political prisoners in the Philippines. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Simon, and thank you for connecting the struggles also. I think that it would be useful maybe to share the link or the contact for people to reach to FFPS to be able to participate in the different campaigns. I would like also to raise that I want to thank you for explaining this non-peace or unpeace context that is prevailing in the Philippines, and it will be like this since the root causes of the conflict are not addressed. And of course, there is a need of a peace process, but as you said, while peace consultants, I think it's 17, if I'm not mistaken, peace consultants remain in jail, there can be no genuine peace process. So I think that this is something we absolutely need to denounce. It's impossible to have a genuine peace process if on one side, the government of the Philippines, people who are a part of this peace process are political prisoners. We are arriving to the last speaker of this webinar, Doug Boker. I would just remind you that you can put the questions in the chat. I think that we will have time for this little forum after Doug, so don't hesitate to put your questions in the chat. Doug, he's a friend and a comrade from the iChirp. He began his connection with the Filipino people struggle with an exposure visit with KMU in the 80s. He is currently based in Ottawa, Canada, and he has been a prominent member of the Canadian Union of Public Employees, and he has a distinguished record as a public servant. As the coordinator, yes, just you need to be, recognized. Also, as the coordinator for the Ontario Committee for Human Rights in the Philippines, Doug was one of the founder of iChirp. And iChirp, as you know, has long campaigned for the release of all political prisoners in the Philippines and generated political, moral, and material support for prisoners and their friends and their families and communities. As the Marcos regime continues to arrest, as Tinay said, and imprison peace consultants, leaders, peasant leaders, union leaders, and other activists and human rights defenders on trumped-up charges, there is an ongoing need to generate this support. So, Doug, I think you will speak about what iChirp is doing for political prisoners, and you have the floor. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. Given I've been around a while, they asked me to speak about the history of work in general and our work, so I'll go with that. I mean, obviously, solidarity work for political prisoners goes back to the Marcos dictatorship in the 70s and 80s. At that time, a lot of it was coordinated by groups like Amnesty International and the churches. International work from the Solidarity movement was less developed at that time. After 86, and Tinay spoke about this, prisoners were increasingly arrested on trumped up charges, violent acts such as murder, frustrated murder, etc. She went through the list. And the reality is Amnesty won't touch these people. They probably support a handful of prisoners in the Philippines, if any now. So this makes it our responsibility to take up this work. And clearly the way in which the system is organized in the Philippines is political detention is part of a military strategy. A military strategy to isolate people, to move them off the streets, to run them through a court system that runs at the speed of molasses. People's cases are constantly remanded, delayed, and so they never get justice for years and years and years. On average, I think we estimate that it takes 6 to 8 years for a case to go through the courts and get dismissed. So that means people are in prison, they're isolated, and our work is to provide support, political prisoner support through the global solidarity networks. In my experience, has emerged from solidarity visits. My first experience, and I've been to prisons 7 times, but my first experience was 15 years ago in Batangas in 2010. I was with a CUPE delegation, Canadian Union of Public Employees, that has a partnership with Courage and ACT and the Workers' Action Center in Cavite. At that time, 3 people had just been arrested in Batangas, and WAC encouraged us to go to the prison. We had a day off after 10 days of intensive exposure, and I had some difficulty convincing my colleagues to go, but eventually, like 11 of us, 10 or 11 of us, went to the prison. And this was quite an experience. The particular prison we went to had been raided by the NPA in the, I don't know, 2003, 2004, 2005, and like 8 or 9 prisoners had been taken out of the prison. And so this was the first time since that they had political detainees. And so there was a furious amount of activity at the front of the prison. They were building guard towers. There were armed army units had been deployed to the prison. But the process to get in was somewhat easy. Um, I showed my ID. They took my name down, took my ID. They walked me to the gate along with the other males in our group. They opened the door with a key and they put us in the center of the yard with no escort, nothing. And so we wandered around a bit. Obviously meet up with people. It's not a big area, and we were gradually escorted to the room of Sonny Rogelio and Billy Batrina, two prisoners at that time, and that in itself was an education. We were in a unit that was supposed to house 7 people. There was probably like 25 people in there. Everybody was living in boxes, like refrigerator boxes, freezer boxes. Those were their homes in this. Um, that was my first visit. The tote board at the time said there were 500 prisoners in that prison. Um, I went back there in 2013, and you could no longer go into the yard because it had been converted into housing. They built a roof over it, and there were 1,000 prisoners in what at 500 had been an overcrowded prison. When I went back in 2016, there were 1,500 prisoners in that. So over 6 years, the population had tripled, and it was just enormously crowded. Um, the processes changed. The second time I went, I needed the governor's permission to enter the prison as opposed to just walking up, showing my ID. Um, that was kind of exciting for me because I got an autograph of Vilma Santos, who was the governor at the time. She was a former movie star, so I thought that was a really big deal for me. Anyway, um, the reality is that inside the going into the prison is an education. You hear about people's cases, you hear about the falsification of evidence against them, you hear about how long it takes for the cases to work their way through the courts. And, one guy who was accused of being in a fight in a public market, his witness was deployed overseas in Nigeria or somewhere in Africa on a peacekeeping mission, which meant that he didn't get out of jail. They kept remanding and remanding and remanding his case, keeping him again away from activist work and stuff like that. The other striking thing is the conditions. We talked, the food is not sufficient for people to eat. They need their families or other outside organizations to support them to provide enough sustenance to survive prison. Um, the isolation for many is a pressing thing. The other prison that I visited is Dayet in southern Luzon, and there 2 Manila activists who'd been snatched off the street were put in prison there. Their names were Randy Vegas and Raul Campesino. Um, that prison is 8 hours from Manila, if you're lucky, maybe 9. And so for their families to visit, it required a tremendous amount of logistics for them to get there and visit. That was another thing is that you're constantly being isolated from your family, and that kind of brings me back to why political prisoner solidarity. One of my old housemates, Judy Tagawalo, was a long-term detainee in the Marcos period, and she told me how she conveyed to me how important it was for her when she was in prison to get the letters from Amnesty, to know that there are people on the outside who are supporting you. It's part of our political responsibility to support the prisoners, to ensure that their well-being in prison, that their emotional and psychological support is there to the best of our ability to provide it, so that they can endure the years of incarceration in locations far from their homes and survive the conveyor belt of the justice systems. There are also physical risks in prison. I know that from the Tyson 3, there were constant rumors of potential assassinations of activists when they're in jail, and the threat is you're actually in prison with people who may commit violence against you while you're in there. Um, so I think the question is, what can we do? We can run political prisoner support programs. OCHIRP and ICHIRP have done that. Letter writing workshops, letter writing campaigns. We ran newspaper ads featuring various political prisoners. We've You can ship material support, toothbrushes, shampoo, toothpaste, combs, whatever. We Christmas cheer campaigns, material and financial support for imprisoned activists. Be creative. I've seen the United Church of Canada, through Beth Delaga and Stu Lister, established a fund from a deconsecrated church to provide support for imprisoned activists. That's still running. It provides support for court cases and things like that, and to support prisoners in jail. So there are a lot of avenues of attack that we can provide support. Anyway, that's all I have to say other than free all political prisoners. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Doug, and thank you for keeping it with many information, but keeping it short, because we have like, I think, 10 minutes for an open forum, and I have many questions. Some of them I have seen that, Tina, you have already answered in the chat, but I will try to summarize the questions. And yeah, I think it's mainly to Tinai, but I think all of you, the speakers, can answer if you want just to step in and answer. So we have questions, of course, we had questions regarding how to write letters to the political prisoners in the provinces. I think, Tinai, you have given the address of Karapatan's offices in Manila, and you have also answered that it's possible to find, with just the name of the political prisoner, that you can find where this person is detained and deliver the letter. There was a question because you mentioned a number of political prisoners released over the past months since June. Are you able to identify why there has been a number released? That would be the first question. And the second question, we have just give you two for the moment. If there is a map or a list of political prisoners and their respective places of detention in the Philippines, and how's the law concerning the right to visit them as an individual or organization representative?
Sure, Claire. Thanks, Doug. Those are interesting. I wish you can, write them down in a book or memoir or something. But these are precious to us because of the lessons that we continue to learn. As for of course, we have a list. We maintain a database of all the political prisoners that we have documented. but we're still constantly updating it because there were several impacts of the extensive militarization, especially in many areas in the Philippines. So some of our human rights workers have been forced to, take a lower profile and hence are unable to do the more systematic monitoring and assistance of some areas. So perhaps iChirp can help us with the map. And this is where we need, some Gen Z stuff because Mong and I are from, what are we from, Mong? Gen X, Gen Y, whatever. So a map is a very good suggestion on the law to visit. Um, there is an existing law on the rights of arrested or detained or persons under custodial investigation. Those allowed the number of those people who are allowed to visit any detained person are quite limited. In fact, even Karapatan and NUPL, their lawyers have faced some challenges the past few years. Um, but pretty much the guidelines, when we say guidelines, these are guidelines of jail authorities, are somewhat very arbitrary. So it can differ from one place to another. And what we have noticed is that when political prisoners do political work, especially in, work, I mean, doing some sort of negotiations or campaigns, or to a certain extent, a level of alliance work with some of the jail wardens, the entry of visitors are, more lax. That's why um, most of the visits that are okay for those outside the Philippines are better in some places and some are not. So very arbitrary. Um, but we are continuing programs for solidarity groups to, do visits in areas where it is possible or in detention facilities which are possible. On financing terrorism, I think there was a question. On financing terrorism cases, yes, that's true. There is a rising number of those who are facing financing terrorism. And they have faced freezing of their bank accounts or assets and the criminal charges against them. But many have been, as I said, have been dismissed. And, it takes time for us to go to the higher courts, including the Supreme Court, to challenge the constitutionality of the anti-terrorism law. That's a goal, because definitely the law itself is uh, not only repressive, but very vague in terms of defining terrorist acts. Reason why people are killed or imprisoned, we don't really know how the criminal fascist mind of the state, those in the state, go. No, so they would leave some peace consultants alive. They would take them, they would arrest and detain them. Some they would kill. You know, um, uh, we have no direct answer on how they choose to do so. But definitely, the target is to, as they say, quote unquote, neutralize them in whatever way. That's how they, define. That's the word they use to um, refer to this, especially the peace consultants. Definitely, there's overcrowding the past few years because of the increased number of drug suspects arrested. So when Duterte, assumed power, thousands have been arrested because of supposedly drug charges. And many have been arrested likewise of other petty crimes, stealing a can of what's corned beef or, sardines. But because people don't have money for bail or no money to get free, competent legal counsel, that's, part of the problem, when that drives the overcongestion of jails. Specific campaigns for specific political prisoner status. There have been campaigns, but at the same time, right now the political prisoners some have their own area in jails, no? But some are included in the general population. Technically, the prisoners are not prohibited from forming associations. In fact, there are many gangs. The names of the gangs are really funny also. Batman, Superman, those kinds of stuff. Batang City Jail. But uh yeah, they're technically not disallowed from forming organizations or associations. So uh political prisoners take advantage of that, ambiguity. I guess those are a few. Well, as a last note, they say activists bloom and revolutionaries bloom where we are planted. And I guess that's the prevailing attitude of the political prisoners. So when they're inside jail, they're the people's paralegal. They tend to all forms of problems inside jail, that they assist those inside their fellow prisoners on their legal problems, on their cases. They initiate livelihood programs. I heard that one political prisoner even managed to put up a a bakery, no? um, and other forms of, livelihood projects so that they can all support each other inside, including those considered ordinary prisoners. They do undertake formal studies. Some of them have, finished some degrees inside because you can just imagine the long-term imprisonment, no? That you can finish a degree inside. Of course, they do organize, and that includes wardens or, some jail officials inside. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tinay, and for answering all those questions. Actually, I think that John is saying thank you for answering my many questions and very comprehensive and useful answers. I don't know, maybe Monk, if you want to take the floor and compliment and.
Well, Tinay said everything. It's more
Okay.
than
Are
enough.
there other questions? I have a question. Just if you could say a little bit about in the gender perspective, now what's the situation of the women? Because we know that it's always more complicated. And I remember I met former political prisoners when I was in the Philippines several times, and I remember that the female detention facility in Metro Manila, I think it's the most horrible place, and it was like 300% of occupation, and it was I was in awe because after being released, these women they keep organizing and fighting, especially in Gabriela. But if you want maybe to say something about the female detainees, thank you.
Well, generally the health facilities inside are, I mean, forgive me for saying this, but it's shit. But uh, but especially for women, especially for reproductive healthcare, there's literally nothing, no provision for that. So some who have been arrested when they were pregnant have faced several difficulties. No, some of the babies have died because of the impact and the conditions inside jail, which are not conducive for pregnant women. And there's various forms of sexual harassment. from physical to psychological. These are things actually that we are looking at how to document. Yeah. And that includes also the forms of violations against LGBTQ political prisoners, because there have been many organizers who have faced similar violations. So, all in all, I mean, there's a veneer of in the Philippines, we have lots of those. No, we have all the best laws, laws on violence against women, laws on safe spaces, but when it's not only about how these are implemented, but because of the very deep roots of patriarchy in, especially in the prison system. So um, I would say that women and LGBTQ in prison still, of course, face the double burden while in prison.
Thank you, Tinay. We are a little later than the formal hour of ending this webinar, so I think that it's fair to stop here, even though I'm convinced that we could be speaking like an hour more. But if there are no other questions, I think that we have messages. This Day of Solidarity, I also think about the numerous Palestinian political prisoners, of course. It's connecting. It's all about connecting struggles, as I said, and it's a reality everywhere. The fact that you are imprisoned because of your freedom of expression is not respected, your freedom of opinion, and the definition that Tinay you gave in the beginning of this webinar. I want to thank you, the speakers, Pastor Alan, Tinay, Mong, and also, of course, Simon and Doug, and all of you for participating in this webinar. I think we had more than almost 80 people connected, so it's a success, and it's great that people actually feel that political prisoners is something they are concerned about. I want to thank ICHRP Secretariat and the tech team, as usual, for making this webinar possible, and our solidarity, international solidarity, thoughts, hearts goes to the 696 Filipino political prisoners, their families, comrades, communities, at this time of international attention to the reality of political prisoners around the world, as we just said. Again, as ICHRP, as FFPS, we urge you to engage with our campaigns for the release of political prisoners, and please to provide material support to them, and especially for legal assistance in remote areas of the country. We want to remind you that to get involved in the campaigns, we are always seeking international letters to political prisoners. We know that it means a lot to them. And also we are asking for donation to provide them with this material support in their struggle. So please go to our website, ichrp.net/freethemall, and you will find there more resources. And of course, you can reach out to the webinar co-sponsors, as I said, Peace for Life and FFPS. Thank you very much again, and long live international solidarity. Thank you.